Welcome, everyone. This is the new Canaan Library. This is our very first craft shop of this summer. It's something that we've never done before. We've always done writers' workshops or writer classes during the year. And this time we're moving into summer and just trying this idea of, if people want to, kind of have a summer writing experience, we could do it here at New Canaan Library. And our very first author is Elon Green. And I just want to do, good morning, Elon, how are you?
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm just going to do, how are you doing, Elon?
Pretty well.
We're coming out of the pandemic. What is that like for writers to be coming out of a pandemic?
I'm freelance and I work from home, so it doesn't change anything for me much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, hi. My name is Laura Cavers. Some of you may know me from the writing classes and reading. I'm the reader advisor here at New Canaan Library. We're here to talk about this book right here, Last Call, the investigative reporting that Elon has done, and how he sets up his interviews, how he does his investigations, and if you have not had a chance yet to read this book, it is such a testament to just perseverance of lots and lots and lots of investigations and having to talk to a lot of different people. So Elon's a wonderful person to be helping us with how to set up an interview and do it successfully. Sorry, I'm just now admitting another person. Elon has written for the New York Times Magazine, The Atlantic, The New Yorker, and the Columbia Journalism Review, and appears in the true crime anthology Unspeakable Acts, of which we do have here at the library, if you want to check that out. He has been an editor at longform.org since 2011. Elon is also a former resident of New Canaan, having lived here in his childhood. And so we're very glad to have him back. So Elon, your writing beat, so to speak, is predominantly nonfiction. Is that correct?
Yes, or I'm just plugging in some headphones.
Yeah, entirely nonfiction. I don't have the imagination or the patience for fiction. And for me, most of what I like about journalism is the opportunity to talk to people and not have to rely on my imagination at all.
For the attendees who are here with us this morning, and most of them are writers or people who are learning to write, doing the classes here, can you tell us briefly what longform.org is? Is it a good resource for them?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty invaluable. It's really just a website that every day curates and presents 3 or 4 different stories, pieces of journalism, sometimes old, sometimes new, from all sorts of different publications. And it's really just examples every day of great work by all sorts of different writers.
Yes, I actually went on it. I never had heard of it before, so I do see it as a really great resource for anyone who is just wanting to understand the journalism form. It's a great resource. Just go to it and read through, and you'll get a great sense of really, really great writing and reporting.
Yeah, I mean, I never went to journalism school, so everything I learned was by either reading or interviewing people who were better at it than I was.
So your book, Last Call, I want to make sure I can get it. I'm certainly not well versed with camera and showing things on camera. This is an amazing book about the last call killer. I didn't know about the last call killer, don't think I remember anything about it. I actually lived in New York City during the 80s and 90s when he was, sort of plying the gay bars of New York City and luring his victims away. And I didn't know anything about that. This was all during the AIDS crisis and when that crisis was upon the city. And then also, I didn't know about it because of the, just the sexual orientation of the people were not as thoroughly accepted at the time. They were actually sort of, because of the AIDS crisis, sort of, black marked, or, no one wanted to necessarily, find out about this sort of thing. And the police departments were also kind of the same ilk until this last call killer was actually, how many victims, Elon? I read, but I can't, is what, 6 victims? 5?
A minimum of 4 in New York over 3 years, but there were almost certainly more of them.
Wow.
Detectives think it's probably closer to the dozens.
Oh my.
Perhaps all over the country because he traveled a lot.
And at the same time, the Son of Sam was well known, Jeffrey Dahmer was well known, all of those, but somehow the last call killer was just not a large news item. So how did you find out about this, Elon? Tell us how this story kind of came into your.
It was pretty by accident. I was reading an old issue of The Advocate, which was sort of the first prominent gay newspaper. And it was a story from the mid-90s. There was a cover story about anti-gay violence. And, 4 or 5 pages into the story, there were a few paragraphs on this unsolved case in New York, and they described the murders, and they described, a little bit about the victims. And, I figured out what the case was, and I was really shocked I hadn't heard of it.
Yeah.
And, I just started researching the victims, and that's what got me interested in the case.
And this was something, I mean, you do write mainly about crime, is that, no?
No.
This was.
I would say it's a pretty small percentage of what I've done, and I don't have a particular interest in it. For me, the genre of true crime is just a way to talk about history, and the murders, is really just an excuse to talk about larger issues.
Which is what you do go into with, the AIDS crisis that was blanketing the city at the time, but also the AIDS not the AIDS organizations, but because of the AIDS crisis and the gay community that was forming to become more recognized as someone, as a people that should be cared for, and these murders should not be happening. So that is also, you put that into the book, and it's a big part of the history that, again, living in New York City at the time, I do remember the AIDS crisis and being so very shocked by how quickly it was moving through the city, and the sort of disappearance of people, meaning that they were, either sick and dying. Again, it was only because you saw it. There was not a lot that people wanted to talk about. It was an interesting time where we had to come to terms with this whole crisis. So your investigation, this goes from Pennsylvania. The crimes happened, they originated in New York City, but that's where the victims were lured. But then it took out to Pennsylvania, to New Jersey, all the way up to
Maine.
Some investigations in Maine. And so there was a lot of information that, from that curiosity that you had from that one article, when you started to delve into it, it just kept growing. I mean, did you sometimes say, this is way too big, I don't want to do this, or did it get you more interested?
No, I mean, to me, the larger it got, you know, and obviously the more work I did, the larger it got. You know, the more intrigued I was, because, you know, you always want the story to be bigger,
Mhm.
not smaller. And, you know, to be able to, you know, have started with these murders in Manhattan, but then have the story ripple out so much that I end up talking to, you know, the famous graphic designer Milton Glaser, William Bulger, the former head of the Massachusetts Senate, William Cohen, the former Secretary of Defense, and all sorts of activists. You know, that's not something I could have foreseen at the beginning of all this.
So when you have all of this information in front of you, how do you start to piece together who you're going to interview, when you're going to start the interviews? Do you do a lot of research beforehand, reading all police reports, or do you go right to eyewitnesses immediately?
No, because you don't know who those people are. I mean, in my case, I was probably reading as many news stories as I could at the same time as I was going through chunks of the trial transcript, because it was the trial transcript that really provided the basis for the narrative. The prosecutor did a really good job of, you know, getting people to tell detailed versions, you know, detailed iterations of the story. And so, you know, I had things like the testimony of sanitation workers talking about, you know, finding bodies.
Bits and
And
pieces of bodies,
right,
not full bodies.
dismembered body parts. And you know, as names would come up in the trial transcript, I would start calling people, whether they were detectives or the people who found the bodies, or friends, family members. You know, I was going through the events chronologically just so I could understand how everything unfolded. And whenever I'd have a question about something, I'd just call whoever I thought might have the answer. And that's, you know, started the process. Every time I would interview somebody, I would always say, you know, at some point, who else should I talk to? And then I'd talk to whoever they recommended. And slowly but surely, I ended up talking to about 160 people.
And so most of the victims that you talk about in your book, they're mainly in the 80s and the 90s that the crimes were that happened. But then it took decades before the prosecutors could really, they first found the person to then, how many years was it between
Well,
and when?
between the first known New York murder victim and the time he was arrested, it was a decade.
Mm.
But, you know, I write about a murder as early as 1973, and, you know, who knows how many there were in between.
And so these records, just for people to know, police records are public records. Is that correct? So
No, they're not.
No, they're not. Okay.
Court transcripts are, you know, if they result in a conviction, a court transcript is generally public in the sense that you can request it and then you have to pay for it. You're not going to get them on Google.
Mm.
If there's an acquittal, they're not public. And as far as police records, they're very hard to get, even if the case is closed. If the case is still ruled officially open, as two of the murders still are, you can't get them, you know, officially. I'm very bad at public records requests, and I got very little through official channels, but detectives just gave me stuff that they had saved. And that's a lot of how I managed to piece things together.
And so really, the interview with these, the people who were actively doing the investigating, interviewing them was the best source, because you couldn't, you could go through articles, but you knew right away there weren't a lot of articles. Public records are not public records. You can't, police records are not public, of which I actually once was told police records are public. So I'm glad to hear, no, they're not.
Well, certain records are, but when there are records that are deemed investigative material, they're going to give you a very hard time about getting it.
Okay. And so you are finding out from the transcripts who the detectives are, and so you have to immediately start your interviews to find out the bulk of how you want to possibly get all the information to get your book together. And is this before you have written the
Proposal?
The proposal to the publishers, or is it after?
Yeah. This was all, I did about 45 interviews just for the proposal. And, you do as much work as is necessary to tell some version of the story. And that's what I did for the proposal. It was, I think it was like an 11,000 word proposal. And a lot of the writing I did for the proposal didn't end up in the book, but it doesn't matter.
So for the attendees to understand, when you're writing fiction, you have to finish the whole book, give it to a literary agent for them to then give to the publisher. But if you're writing a nonfiction, the route to take is to get information about the book you want to write and create the proposal to then give to whom? Who do you give it to, Elon? Do you have to research which publisher might be interested, or?
No, my agent, sent the proposal to, a pretty select list of publishers and editors. And then we had meetings with them.
Okay. All right. So I just wanted to clear that with the people who are learning about the whole writing craft, that nonfiction, you write a proposal after finding good information for them to then judge if your book, how you would like to do it, is something they would like to publish. Thank you for that. Okay. So here you got all the court transcripts and everything, and you're creating a list of people that you want to talk to. Is there a organization, or what do I want to say? Is there a way that you organize your who you're going to talk to first? Is there a first cut, second cut, third cut kind of?
Yes and no.
People.
Usually I was talking to people as I needed information. Like if I, got to some, like for instance, when I was getting to a section in the third chapter, or I was writing about the high school days of the second victim. He had gone to Boston College High School in the 50s. I just started calling his classmates, and I interviewed, I think, 8 of his classmates. And I had gotten a hold of the yearbook, so I had all the names. And, the yearbooks are not publicly available, but, one of the classmates sent it to me, and then the school's archivist cooperated with me and sent me material. But outside of that, I usually tried to talk to, the clock is always ticking when you're trying to talk to people. So I would talk to older people as soon as I could. I probably did the last interview with Manhattan District Attorney Robert Morgenthau, who at this point might be best known for inspiring the show Law and Order, the first district attorney on that show. I talked to him when he was 99 years old.
Oh my God.
You never know. And you want to get everybody on the record when you can. I've had about a half dozen book sources die already.
Oh,
Some of COVID, some
oh,
like Morgenthau, old age. He died some months later. Sorry, and yeah, I mean, in general, you don't want to wait.
so just to let you know, for your future researching, high school yearbooks, the libraries have the high school yearbooks.
Some do, some do.
Oh, well, we have here
It's not
in Canaan, we do. We have it.
not all libraries are the same, and not all schools. It depends. It probably depends if it's a public school or private school. In this case, I was writing about a private school.
Oh, okay.
It really, really may depend.
Okay.
Because some places are just more protective of those texts than others.
Okay, so what are the first steps of setting up the interview? You know who it is that you want to talk to. What do you send them an email, send them a letter? How
So
do you
so
get them to
there's
talk?
I sort of differ from a lot of my friends and colleagues on this regard. Like my friend Pamela Koloff, who writes for the New York Times and ProPublica, she sends letters, as does my friend David Gran, who wrote Killers of the Flower Moon and Lost City of Z. Both of them, they send, long, detailed letters, telling people what they want. Or barring that, they email them. I'm too impatient to do any of that. So I just find their either home phone numbers or their cell numbers and call them directly, because I feel like enough's enough. I'm just going to get them on the phone and tell them what I want, what I need. And if they're going to say no, I'd rather hear it sooner than later and not dance around all this business. Barring that, if it's a really sensitive thing, like when I contacted the daughter of one of the murder victims, Tom Mulcahy, I wrote to her personal email, and one of the reasons she wrote back is because I had found her personal email. Her name is now different because she's married. But in general, I like to have as few steps between me and the person I want to interview as possible, just because it saves time. And oftentimes, if I can get in touch with somebody, it's taken as a sign by them that I know what I'm doing because I found them. I did an interview for the book with a man who had gone home with the murderer sometime in the early 90s, and I had found his name in a court transcript. And I think one of the reasons he talked to me is because I had found him. And most of these people are never asked about any of the events in the book, and finding them goes a long way.
Yeah. And so I'm curious, the people who write the long letters, do they have success, or do they have kind of the same success failure ratio as you do of doing a cold call?
I mean, David and Pam are, maybe the two best people in the entire industry. So yeah, they have a great deal of success, doing it their way. That's just not my way.
Right.
And part of it is, there is no right or wrong way to do this. You do whatever suits your temperament and your process. They're more patient than I am.
So when you have these people on the phone, or you're emailing back and forth with them, or, and you're talking to them, do you need to warm them up, or do you just go right in and say, I'm going to be, I'm calling you about this cold case, this last call killer, and these are my questions?
No, you can't do that. I guess you can. I just don't.
Okay, it's
when
just
I
not a good thing.
when
Yeah.
I call
Warm 'em up.
when I call people, when I called people for the book, I wasn't, I never asked for an interview up front. I was always just calling to tell them that I was working on the book, you know, because I didn't, you know, if somebody was going to be named or even alluded to, I just didn't want them not to know. And so, you know, most of the time that would lead to an interview, but I never called them up with the explicit intention of interviewing them. You know, there's someone I interviewed for the book, a cousin of the murderer, who spent the first 15 minutes of our phone call yelling at me because he was so angry that I had called him in the first place. And then after he yelled at me for 15 minutes, he said, "Okay, what do you want to know?" And then I turned on the tape recorder and we talked for another 45 minutes. You know, there's no one way to handle any of these things. You have to respond to the people's, you have to get a sense of who they are and their personalities, and go from there.
And, you know, is there a need to like have really short, crisp questions? Is that more helpful than longer questions that may, you know, have, you know, the longer sort of interview questions that are 2-3 questions all at once? You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I mean, shorter questions are always better, just because the longer the question is, the more likely the person you're talking to is to forget what you're asking. I mean, in general, when I was calling people, I wasn't calling them about, you know, like lots of stuff. I'd be calling just to fill in gaps. And so it'd be really easy. I could say, okay, like, you know, you went to high school with Tom Mulcahy in 1953. What do you remember about him? I mean, they'd be pretty general questions. You know, the more micro questions generally were for the detectives, or the macro questions were for the detectives, where I'd say, okay, like, let's start at the beginning, you know, walk me through the investigation. Most sources for the book were not, you know, did not have that perspective on the story. And so I was calling them about very small things. I mean, one of the reasons Robert Morgenthau talked to me is because I don't think anyone had ever asked him about this activist group, the Anti-Violence Project, or had ever talked to him about the gay panic defense. And so, you know, we only talked for 6 or 7 minutes, but, you know, I got him to address both of those topics.
So I'm curious about, you know, as you're talking to them, are you taking notes? But I heard you say you turned on the recorder. Do you do all interviews? You turn on a recorder?
I record everything. I didn't take any notes for this book, which is also not the standard operating procedure. All of my friends take tons of notes. And that works for them because they're good note takers. I've never been a good note taker. And so once I started doing this stuff, I thought, okay, like, taking notes is just, I'm just going to be fighting against myself. And so I just record everything. I figure that's much better. It works better for me in part because recording captures, you know, the entirety of somebody's speech and the nuances of somebody's speech, and even the best note takers are going to miss that. You know, usually if I'm meeting somebody in person, I'll bring a notepad just to put them at ease, but usually I'm just writing down bullshit, like, you know, they have brown shoes or something. I don't actually, you know, I don't like, you know, if they're talking to me, I don't care what direction they look in. I don't care what they're wearing. In general, I'm just documenting stuff that I actually care about, and I think the reader's going to care about. I mean, you probably noticed in the book, there's not like tons of physical descriptions of
Right.
people, and that's because, you know, a lot of writers spend time talking about how people look, but honestly, as a reader, I forget, like, the next page. By the next page, I don't remember how anybody looks, and it doesn't honestly, I don't feel like there's anything lost. So when it came time for me to write the book, I feel like I'm not going to spend time on stuff that I know doesn't stick with people.
So when you are say you're in, you have to tell people you're recording.
Yes.
Do some
Well,
people balk at that?
it actually depends. There's different laws by state. That's called one-party consent and two-party consent. New York, I believe, is two-party consent, meaning the other person has to agree to be recorded. But there are states where that's not the case. But for me, it didn't matter. I always asked because that added in a layer of trust.
Hmm.
You know, so I never started recording. Actually, that's not true. In one case, I did because the person I was interviewing was a notorious liar, and I just didn't want to lose anything. And so I recorded that from the beginning. But in general, yeah, I only started recording if they would agree to it, and sometimes it never got that far, and sometimes they didn't agree to it, and we just had off the record talks.
And so I want to talk about on the record, off the record, but before I go to that, I think also recordings, it makes people a little bit more attentive to what they're saying also. You're getting.
Not true, actually.
No?
You would think that would be the case, but actually people forget almost immediately that you're recording. They're not thinking about it. The conversations proceed normally.
And do you think that's because you're recording over the phone, but if you're in person with them and they see the device, do you see there's a little bit of a difference?
Honestly, people in person, you forget about that too. I mean, people are just as inclined to say stupid things, with the recorder in front of them as not.
Hmm.
You're going to say what you're going to say.
Yeah. And after the interview, has anyone ever called you back to say, you know what, I don't want to be in the book. I don't want my interview in the book. Has that ever happened and you've had to scratch a whole bunch of information, or what do you do in that case?
It happens occasionally, but usually the agreement I reach is, you just won't be mentioned by name. But now once I've talked to somebody on the record, they can tell me they don't want to be in the book, but if I need the information, I'm going to use it, and we'll just agree that your name's not going to be mentioned. And in there are things in the book that I agreed I wouldn't disclose the source of the information. I'm not if people were worried about, I kept names out of the book, I changed names. I didn't want to make trouble for anybody, but it was very rare that somebody, had second thoughts.
Mm-hmm. So some of the questions I'm seeing here, some people are, so basically you have face-to-face interviews and over the phone interviews. And then are there any interviews that are over email? And how, what is like the percentage? I mean, it sounds like you favor the phone call over the actual in-person.
No, that's not true.
No?
In-person interviews are ideal.
Okay, good.
Always. Those are the best interviews. But, when you have to interview so many people, you do them when you can. And also, I was not on an unlimited budget. So it's not as if I could fly around the country, talking to whomever I wanted. When people are available, you got to talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, the large majority of the interviews were done over the phone, just me sitting downstairs at the dining room table. with my recorder propped against the computer and next to the phone. But generally when I interviewed somebody in person, it was somebody that I had already interviewed, and I just was going out there just to meet them, just to sort of solidify my, relationship, whether it was a detective who wanted to give me handwritten notes in person, or the sister of one of the victims out in Santa Fe. Usually in person, these were people who wanted to show me things, that they didn't want to scan or email. And in that case, certainly was worth it to just get on a plane or get in the car. But generally speaking, that just wasn't necessary. And I didn't feel like it was, I had to go places just to say I'd been there.
Mhm.
And quite frankly, usually people can't tell the difference. I went to college in Boston, but I didn't actually go to Boston for the book. I didn't have to go to Philadelphia for the book. If you talk to, the thing is that because the book takes place decades in the past, the locations I'm describing are no longer there.
Mhm.
Don't look anything. I went to Youngstown, Ohio to meet some people, but like none of the places I describe in Youngstown is still there. Going to these locations is really overrated. But if I can talk to enough people who were there at the time, I can recreate it anyway.
Yeah, you did go back to the bartenders of of the bars where the killer would lie in wait, so to speak, to lure away. And
Well, sometimes bartenders, sometimes managers, sometimes piano players, whoever, or sometimes regulars, whoever it was that I needed to give me the answers I wanted.
yeah. So when you talked about the reluctant people, you were able to change their names. And I remember in the beginning of the book, you said some names have been changed. And so that is just to let the attendees understand that you can do that, change names, or not even mention a name, just say spoke with someone and who was a regular at the bar and said this or something.
There are cases where, often, sometimes I would change names even if people didn't ask. Like if I was writing about somebody who didn't talk to me for the book, sometimes I changed the name just because I felt like they didn't deserve to have their privacy invaded.
Mhm.
Sometimes if I was writing about somebody, I wouldn't mention that they had even, sometimes I'd mention siblings if they mattered to the narrative, and sometimes I wouldn't mention siblings because I didn't want to draw attention to the family. It's all at the discretion of the writer.
So I want to go back to, you mentioned on the record, off the record. Could you explain how that, are they hard and fast rules, or is
They
this
should be.
from Hollywood? I mean, on the record, off the record, and what do they mean?
So on the record means that everything they are telling you, you can use it and you can attach their name to it. You could say, according to John Smith. Off the record means you're talking and you can't use anything. You can't say that you talk. It's just informational.
Oh, I think you've muted. You have to unmute. Somehow you muted, Elon.
That was weird. I didn't touch anything.
Yeah, I think it was on my end. I was just moving my cursor around. Sorry, my fault.
So there's something called on background, which means that you're not saying where the information, you're generally not saying where the information is coming from, but you can use the information.
Okay. And so when you have these on the record, off the record kind of conversations, or off the record,
Those have to happen first. you cannot say something to a journalist and then say, by the way, that was off the record. People do that all the time, and there's no reason to respect that. I mean, depending on who it is, if it's, you know, someone sort of unfamiliar with how that works, I'll generally respect it. But off the record, on the record, all that stuff is supposed to be agreed to by both parties. You know, you say up front, look, this is going to be off the record, and then the journalist is supposed to agree to that or not agree to that. But it's not something that can generally be retroactively applied.
Okay. Some people are not so, I mean, some of the people that you interviewed, though, are not professional interviewees, and so they may not understand on and
Right, and that's, and in
and
that
that's when you
case-
have discretion.
And in that case, I'm far more lenient than I would be if
Mm.
I'm talking to, you know, someone in law enforcement or government, or, you know, someone who should and probably does know the difference.
And so but it's something that you actually, as the person who's doing the interview, you do have to say, this is, when we start speaking, this is on the record.
No, I don't say that.
No?
I'll say at the beginning of a conversation, I'll say, okay, can I record this? And if they say yes, then I'm recording it. I don't say this is on the record. I mean, it's just, that's understood.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then, so some of the questions I see here, did you interview the murderer?
No.
Did you? No.
I wrote letters. I made, you know, official requests via the Department of Corrections. But the letters were not answered, and the requests from the Department of Corrections were rejected.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, because that's, sometimes people do get to talk to the murderers. Do you think it was the prisoner that said, no, I don't want to talk, or?
No, I know he did. It was
Definitely the prisoner.
the rejection was through him.
Yeah, okay. So here you've got all your information, you're putting it together. I notice you have all your notes in the back of the book. I'd say, what is it, about 20 pages, 25 pages of all your notes that you put in. Everything is cataloged.
Well, it's not really I mean, they're basically, they're not notes so much as just saying, you know, this is where certain information is coming from, and based on such and such an interview.
Yeah, and then you're bringing this to the editor. Does the editor ever say, oh, you know, it's not of course, it's not a complete thing. There's a lot of editing that's going to go on. But does the editor ever say, you know what, I want this angle. Can you go out and interview these people, this other faction? Does that happen once you present to the editor?
I'm sure it does. Didn't happen with me. I mean, my editor, you know, the original manuscript didn't have an epilogue, and so he wanted me to write an epilogue. He wanted more information about some of the detectives. But by and large, he didn't have too many substantive edits. You know, it always depends on it always depends on the condition of the manuscript that you're submitting and what the editor wants. And my editor was pretty light with me. But I had also had I had it read by so many different, you know, people who are better at this than I am, and so many of these edits had been done that the manuscript was in pretty good condition by the time I delivered it.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, just a question that I'm curious about. Can you tell us a really bad interview, like what just went totally wrong, more than, you know, the guy just yelling at you for 15 minutes and then giving you then having a conversation with you? I mean, was there just an interview that just didn't work? Just
Not for this book, actually. I mean, I've had plenty of interviews where things went sideways for stories. But for this book, because I was calling people about something so specific and that people had by and large never talked about, if I got them on the phone and they agreed to be interviewed, it always went well because they wanted to talk about
Yeah.
it. So generally speaking, interviews went better than I expected they would. I don't really think I ever had a situation where someone agreed to be interviewed and then it didn't go well.
Mm. Well, then in your career, not about this book, but in your career, your whole writing career, was there an interview that just was so like, ugh, really bad?
Oh, sure. Once
And just like a, just call this a, letting everyone know like what not to do or.
Yeah, I mean, I
Or
once
do
interviewed
worse.
the head of the Brookings Institution who didn't like my questions and said I was stupid.
When that happens, do you just get up and walk away, or do you just keep trying to get that person to answer?
Oh, I just ignore
Person
it.
throwing a wall up. I mean, how much are they sort of doing it you?
If they're not ending the interview, then I just keep going.
Okay.
I don't care. Say what you want. And sometimes uncomfortable interviews are the best ones. I mean, I interviewed Paul Simon about one of his last albums, and we were on the phone for like 45 minutes, and he spent a good portion of the interview telling me I was wrong about my interpretations of the record, and it made for a great interview.
And so that you just kind of let it keep going because you're getting information
Yeah.
and it's all on the record. You tell, here you
Yeah, if he's gonna,
talking to me.
I had been allotted a half hour and the interview went about 45 minutes. So
Yeah.
he might have thought I was wrong about stuff, but he wanted to keep talking.
Well, I have asked all my questions. Are there things that I've missed about how to do an interview that the attendees may want to, just know before I open it up to their questions?
I mean, the number one rule of interviews is to not talk over your subject and just to shut the hell up. For a while, I used to have a note attached to my computer saying, shut the hell up, because you don't want to talk over a good answer and or interrupt. I would say that's the thing. And also, the best questions to ask are not, sometimes you have to ask yes or no questions, but in general, you don't want to ask those questions because you want to make sure that the person you're interviewing has to work a little bit. You don't say, was the sky blue? You say, what color was the sky?
And then it's always good to just be silent. Just let them keep filling in.
Yeah. You can't go wrong by not saying anything. Because generally, people will get nervous and answer your question. Tom Wolfe calls it information. He called it information compulsion. People wanting to help you even though they shouldn't. And that happens all the time.
I think I've asked all the ones that have come to me over the chat.
Well, there's that question about, can a person refuse to be in a book?
We kind of talked about that a bit, but yeah, go right ahead.
I mean, there were people, yes and no. You can refuse to be interviewed. That happens. But once you've talked to me, there's no, like when you're doing a documentary, you have to get, release statements. If you have someone on camera, you have to get a release statement or you can't use their image. But it doesn't work like that with nonfiction. I didn't have to get anybody's permission to use them. But, you know, again, a lot of this is that it's discretion. And, you know, I had a very tense conversation with the son of one of the victims who said, look, I'd rather you not do this book. He's like, I know you, I don't have any choice in the matter, but, you know, people try, and you just have to use your judgment. I mean, I kept his name out of the book. I only put names in the book when I thought they were necessary.
Is there a difference between, you're mostly an investigative type of writer.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that. I mean, I would say very few of the things I've done are investigative. I mean, I haven't even written that many features. What I've mostly done actually is Q&As.
When someone wants to write a memoir,
Mm-hmm.
talked with friends of yours who have writing memoirs and whether they're going to put in a quote from a friend or not, or they not, you know, what are those kind of rules with memoir too?
Well, I don't think there are any real rules, but I think it's, if you are writing a memoir and you're quoting somebody, I think it just makes good sense to tell them, just because maybe you're remembering the quote wrong. You know, when Tobias Wolff and Jeffrey Wolff were writing memoirs about their family, their mom, you know, reviewed their manuscripts just to see if their recollections lined up with hers. You know, you want to find at least somebody to bounce your memories off of, because they're probably wrong.
We have another question. Someone wants clarification of the difference between off the record and on background.
Yeah, so off the record means that you are being told something and you can't use that information. You can't use the information at all. On background means you can use the information, but you can't say where you're getting it.
And that on background is something that's arranged between you and who you're interviewing?
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes, like, somebody will try to go off the record with me and I'll say, well, can we at least do this on background so that it's not like a total waste?
Or attributed to a particular person.
Or yeah, say, you know, somebody familiar with the situation or some vague, you know, descriptive.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so everyone, thank you so much to Elon for taking the time this morning